My name is Stephen Middleton. I'm a mass media lecturer, traveler, and documentary filmmaker living in Kentucky. I've always thought the Appalachian region of America held some of the most fascinating people, stories, and culture from the entire United States. From folklore to documented history, the hills, hollers, and rivers of the Appalachian region are the true stories of what founded and established America. Of all the tales I have heard, one of the strangest but yet most fascinating is the torrid tale of Indian Head Rock. Indian Head Rock is a 6-ton sandstone boulder that up until 2007 resided in the Ohio River between South Shore, Kentucky and Portsmouth, Ohio. From some of the earliest media documentation, travelers far and wide celebrated and documented the rock and its carved smiling face. The rock became a local legend. But after the lock and dam system creation in the 20th century, the river water's levels rose and the rock disappeared for over 85 years. After a lengthy and exhaustive search that took 3 years, local historians located the rock. In 2007, the rock's precise location was found and removed from its submerged residence, with hopes that a rediscovery would celebrate the history of the region. After the initial congratulatory fanfare of finding the rock, the tone quickly changed. So what if I told you the story about this rock and its removal from the Ohio River led to a news story that captivated the nation? A simple 6-ton sandstone boulder that resided in the Ohio River between South Shore, Kentucky and Portsmouth, Ohio made national news and became the subject of a much publicized legal battle between two states. Indian Head Rock and its documented history has always caused people to stop and take notice. The following story will examine Indian Head Rock, its history, its removal from the Ohio River, the trial, and its current resting place covered by a tarp in a county garage in Greenup, Kentucky. From the earliest of river travelers to modern-day archaeologists, Indian Head Rock has always found a way to fascinate, enchant, and frustrate residents from both sides of the river. This is the story of Indian Head Rock, the Rock of Ages, the Rock of Controversy, the rock that led to a battle between two states, a battle that almost ended up in the Supreme Court. We open our film by taking a look at the current residence of Indian Head Rock inside a Greenup County, Kentucky garage.
You wouldn't believe how many people that we've had them open the garage up and let people stop and look at it. It's like people like you that's not from here that'll come and want to see this. And like I said, we had a Lexington up here about 2 months ago and did a story on it. They did a story, somebody, I don't know if it was the news or the TV, whatever, they did a story on them trying to pull it out of the river. That's when I first heard about the Indian Head Rock. I like I said, I didn't think a lot about it when they first did it. Then I started hearing, one, then another. Then we started getting calls and messages and letters from different groups, the heritage groups, and the people were just completely, they didn't like it at all, that they bothered it and took it out of the water out of its resting place. When they finally settled it, Cliff Duvall, they finally proved that they couldn't say that was the exact rock or whatever that was in the history books. And so they settled it, asked me if I would go get it. I told them I would get it and put it up until they decided what they wanted to do with it, and I've still got it.
How many years has that been?
That's been since, I went and picked it up in 2010. They told us come and get it. It was in the Portsmouth City garage, I believe, for 2 years. So we went over and sized it up, brought the proper truck and took a lowboy over and picked it up. And they helped us load it. We brought it over and put it in our garage, and it's still there today. I think it's historical and very neat, and I think it's part of our history. You know, Kentucky history, it was a marking place for the boats, and you don't go over that far. That was kind of a marker. That's how deep it was. You know, you don't want to get over any closer. And then I'm sure the people in Portsmouth, back in their early times, used it too. They said people used to swim out to it. That's how they got all the initials on it. So, you know, back before the dam, like you said, in the mid-50s. But it's just history, and it should be displayed for our children to see. No, I just hope that one day that, that somebody comes up with an idea or somewhere we can put it, and I would be glad to try to help them.
So how did the famed Indian Head Rock end up here in a dark garage covered by a tarp? The story starts back at the very beginning of the early explorers of the Mississippi Valley.
And once I heard that thing crackle, and somebody said, "This rock's wiggling." And one of the other divers said, "What?" He said, "This rock's wiggling. Get out of the way." And once that rock lifted right off the bottom and just hung there in midair. And we were just elated and astounded, and, well, we got it. Now what do we do with it? We had absolutely no plan. We were just trying to see if we could raise it.
The Ohio River is a superhighway that connects travel and trade routes in America. The Ohio Valley serves as an important route for many businesses, trades, and residents of the region. Before the modern-day lock and dam systems, the river levels rose and fell in periods of drought and excess rain. The famed Indian Head Rock had served the region as a local relic, landmark, and place of interest for riverboats, barges, and residents of both Ohio and Kentucky. Residents of the region had created quite the pilgrimage to visit the rock for centuries. In 1830, legend has it a young John Book, resident of Portsmouth, Ohio, waded out to the rock at a low water time and began carving on the now famous smiling face. Another legend is river pirates marking a spot for lost treasure carved in the face. As the legends grew, the rock became a very popular pastime to travel and carve your name upon for much of the 19th century. The rock became known due to the smiling face, the Indian Head, or the Indian Head Rock. The Ohio Valley had been full of native carvings and earthworks, and others assumed the smiling face was of native origin as well. The legend of the Indian Head can also be traced back to antiquarian and archaeologist Montreville Wilson Dickinson. Dickinson surveyed the Ohio Valley for Southern Mound Builder relics and commissioned John J. Egan to paint panoramas of the Mississippi Valley and the ancient relics Dickinson studied years prior. The panoramas were a precursor to modern motion pictures. Egan's finished work around 1850 was known as the monumental grandeur of the Mississippi Valley. One panel of the panorama featured the famed Indian Head Rock of Portsmouth, but not as a simple sandstone boulder. The panorama featured the rock as a giant native head sticking out of the Ohio River, akin to what you would see on Easter Island. As the panorama traveled from show to show, the legend of the Indian Head also grew. The earliest documented reference to the rock was from Squire and Davis's Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley in 1848. An excerpt from the Squire and Davis book reads of the rock: "It consists of a colossal human head, cut in outline upon the vertical face of a large rock extending into the river. It is always under the water except when the river is at its very lowest stages, and is not exposed oftener than once in 4 or 5 years. It is familiarly known as the Indian's Head, and is regarded as some sort of river gauge or meter. When the water line is at the top of the head, the river is considered very low." Many historians feel Squire and Davis never saw the rock. This is why it is described as colossal. The Portsmouth Enquirer on September 26, 1851, was the first true documented publication that actually saw the rock and wrote about it for the first time. The story of the rock read, "The river is now within 3 inches of the Indian Head. This mark is the outline of a human head engraved upon a large rock, now but a few feet from shore. It is said to have been cut by the Indians many years ago when the river was some 2 or 3 feet lower than at present. We do not know upon what authority the Indian have this credit, but think it is more likely that the pioneers cut it for a low water mark." Photographs of the rock, and more importantly, photographs of people on or around the rock, became a prized possession. Some of the most famed photos of the rock came from the folks who took the time at lower water periods to document being photographed with the rock. The number of carved names and even an etching of a log cabin could be spotted that the water was low enough. The legend of the famed Portsmouth Indian Head rock grew and was even used on postcards for the Portsmouth region. In a period of low water in 1920, created by a dam break downstream, exposed the rock once again. Arthur Bannon of the Portsmouth Bannons decided this may be the last time to get a picture of the rock before the dam was fixed and the water levels rose once again. Bannon and crew noticed the rock was exposed from the water, but the smiling face was still under the water. A crude but effective plan of running the motorboat very quickly past the rock to create wakes to expose the face was implemented. That picture was snapped at the perfect moment, and just like that, the last photo of Indian Head Rock was taken in 1920. Once the dam was repaired and the lock and dam system up and down the Ohio River expanded, the water levels rose to a point the rock was submerged and almost forgotten. That was until 2007, 87 years later.
As I said, we had searched and searched and we couldn't find that thing. And just by perchance, a couple of the divers were swimming in toward the bank and ran into it in 16 feet of water. And there it was, just beautifully preserved.
Looks like the woman was, Charlie. Lloyd, those great big letters.
Oh, how about there's F-A-Y-E-R-S?
I saw Faye.
Back in 2007, without any state or federal authorization, Ohio amateur historian Steve Shaffer's dive team pulled the Indian Head rock out from the Kentucky side of the Ohio River. The plan then was to display the local icon from the early 1900s on Buckeye State soil.
I think I got a telephone call from Steve Shaffer in 2000 asking about if the Corps had any interest in locating this rock. And he came to my office and we discussed it, and we ended up going out. I got Dewey Sanderson, a geologist from Marshall University, involved, and we plotted out all the historical information and tried to get the approximate location of the rock. And we actually had a team doing side scan sonar at one point of the Meldal Pool where the rock is located, and basically I asked them if they could locate the rock, and they did go out and they found 2 rocks basically.
Well, I had the diving group, they come to my office and said that they were there to present me with something for the city. And I asked, well, it's bigger than a bread box and smaller than a car, so they had my interest up, and they explained what was going on. And at that time I told them, well, that's funny. My wife and I were just talking about this, so I have some kind of idea at least what it is. I wasn't a historian or have all the facts like my wife, but at least I had an idea of what they were talking about when they come over.
I kept learning about it, initially I thought a bunch of yahoos went over and grabbed hold of the rock and pulled it out, but then I started learning about it. Man, they'd found it like 4 years before they pulled it out, and they'd looked for it a couple years prior to that. So I started thinking about it. They'd spent thousands of dollars on this project. Hot summers and using oxygen tanks and trying to figure it out, and they were failures for a long time, but they kept going back. and finally located it. And then somebody said, hey, why don't we try to get it out? And then how are you going to, you know, I don't know how heavy they've estimated the tonnage of it, and they come up with this idea of blowing up barrels, and you know, what a great coming together of minds and resources, and I applaud them just in that, you know. And at one point I understood that they were so close to getting it to lift, and they went to Columbus and got additional equipment and tried that, and they were about to quit, and somebody underneath was on, they had audible sound, and somebody said, I felt it move.
Yeah, I had actually, I mean, I guess from, you know, putting this all together, he had found the rock in 2002 after a few years of looking for it. He spent some summers, I think to his own health detriment because of some ear issues, trying to find this rock. And he must have the patience of a rock, because he spent 3 years doing it, trying to find it. And he finally found it. And he told everybody about it after he found it, and was very excited that he found this rock. He told Kentucky, and he told Ohio, and I think told the Corps of Engineers. And I think everybody was just like, well, so what? You found this rock. That all happened and was in the newspaper, but I never really picked up on it. It wasn't something that was on the front of my radar at that time.
After Steve Shaffer and crew located and removed the rock, it was taken across the river to Portsmouth, Ohio. Steve, crew, and the town celebrated the find and the idea of the rock being used as a display piece for the river history of Portsmouth. Things went from celebration to sorrow for Steve very quickly, following the adulation of finding and removing the rock.
But after the unauthorized rock removal, Kentucky filed civil and criminal suit against the Ohio dive team and Ohio itself, claiming theft of a registered, protected Kentucky artifact.
It is absolutely one of the strangest, and something that took on a life of its own. And before long, we were being forced to write stories to follow up as to the progress of this thing, and I kept wanting it to go away, and it kept coming back to me, and it was a new thing every day. And I received a tip from a city worker who told me that this rock had all kinds of historic value and everything on it. It was placed on a trailer, and we found out the trailer was down at the riverbank. So we went down to the riverbank, and that's where we first encountered the famous Indian Head rock. I started getting contacted by news media from Ohio and Kentucky because the word had already circulated, hey, that's our rock. So the Kentucky people were already complaining, and rightly so. You understand the river belongs to Kentucky, and that rock was even on that side. So the first reaction came from Kentucky media, West Virginia media, and other Ohio media. That's kind of where it all went around. My first reaction was that it was a part of history, and we were going to be exposed to something that could become monumental in this area, some way we can look back on our own history.
You know, I don't remember the exact length of time. It wasn't very long, but I know early on I contacted the mayor of South Shore and let her know what was going on and what we would like to see, what we had planned, and ask if she had any kind of interest that they would want it over there. And she kind of agreed that this was really a Portsmouth thing. They didn't really have the money or the place over there to put it, so I thought all was good. But as it went on, I guess the ball, is gathering moss as it rolled, and everybody started getting involved. And the more people got involved, it seemed like the more people wanted to be involved. So anywhere in the river, actually, by law, I guess it's a higher river, but it's owned by Kentucky. But I didn't really see it as an ownership type thing. Nobody would own it. It's a piece of history, and I tried to fly with that, and I guess some people just didn't agree with that.
I must have done a half a dozen pieces on the rock, if not more. I went to Frankfurt when there was a rock rally in the Capitol at the Rotunda. And that's when all the legal issues began, because they were filing the papers there. They wanted that rock. And then it was just, you know, when I'd go and shoot it, it was just in some musty old corner in the Portsmouth City garage. And if you've been in the Portsmouth City garage, it's a pretty dirty place. No offense to those guys. I mean, you know, it's a garage, and they work really hard, and there's a low staff in there, so they don't have a chance to clean all the soot and grime off. And so it was just a big old fat rock, and there was this little gold thing with the barrier around it. It was kind of an oxymoron that this nasty rock in this dirty building had this gold ring around it. So, you know, what's wrong with this picture? It was, this story was a strange one. I mean, it had a life of its own. It went on and on. I've covered a couple of strange ones before, you know, and I love those stories. But the Indian Head Rock, yes, it was one of the strangest stories that I ever did, because there was this statehood that was the battle, and it was just over this big fat rock. But it was in history books, and it was just, you know, it was something that you could stay with. And did people like it? Yeah, they loved it. They ate it up. If it was now on social media, I mean, it would be viral. It would be on the Today Show, and it may have made that anyways, but it would be, you know, on the 24/7 news cycle big time.
Well, they pulled the rock out of the Ohio River, as we're all aware of, and I guess things got a little bit dicey after that. And we all claim that the rock belongs to Kentucky. Of course, the Ohio River, from its my understanding, is it actually belongs to the state of Kentucky, all the way over until its banks. So if you pulled something out of it, I guess it belongs to the state of Kentucky, and the archaeological people came in. Some people said that it's original Indian carvings. Some folks, I think there's even pictures from back in the Portsmouth Times in the early 1900s where people are out standing on the rock itself. They recreated here. They brought their boats out, you know, and they come out and they, you know, you got to remember there was no public pools or things like that. This was the public pool. It was called the Ohio River.
My name's Steve Shaffer. I grew up in Ironton, Ohio, on the banks of the Ohio River. I was in the 6th grade at Central School, and I had a good buddy, Terry Reedy. We were interested in Indians, and somehow we came across a book called Stories Old and Often Told in the school library. And it was written by Henry Bannon back in the 20s, and it talked, just had all kinds of great stuff about regional history and flora and fauna. But it had this great story about how he and his brother had taken this picture in 1920 of the Indian's Head Rock, and how no one had seen it since then, and how he thought it would never be seen again. I wondered if that rock was still on the bottom of the river, and we were, my dad and I were involved in an amateur archaeology group, and we went to a lot of meetings, and we went to different sites to see mounds and different things, and I thought, man, if it's still there, you know, maybe someday somebody will find it. When we decided to look for the rock, and Bob Maslowski was a big help, Corps Engineers archaeologist, we took all the available clues. Henry Bannon had a number of clues in his book, plus the newspaper articles. One was if you stood on Bond Street and you looked out toward the river, that's where the rock was. Well, the college is built on top of Bond Street now, so that view wasn't really accessible, although we did get on top of the college and look. But we narrowed down an area of several hundred yards, and we had learned that obviously the river had risen since the construction of the dams. So when we started looking for this rock, we were looking for it in 20 feet of water plus, thinking the river had come up that much. Well, that, you know, there's an old saying that goes, you build your box and you work inside of it. We had ignored everything at any lesser depth. And we probably swam over, boated over that rock dozens of times. And we were just looking in the wrong place for almost 3 years. I contacted some divers at a dive shop in Portsmouth. As I said, we had searched and searched and we couldn't find that thing. And just by perchance, a couple of the divers were swimming in toward the bank and ran into it in 16 feet of water. And there it was, just beautifully preserved. And one Dean Dixon asked me, he said, you ever think about getting this out? And I said, Dean, this would take a lot of money, a lot of equipment. You need barge, you need cranes. And he goes, no. He goes, I think you can get this out with air. I said, what? He said, with air. He goes, I've gotten cars, he was a search and rescue diver. He said, I've gotten cars off the bottom of the river with nothing but air. I said, man, this is a lot bigger than a car. I said, this is big, and we don't know if it's attached to the bottom of the river. He goes, no. He says, yeah, I'd like to try it if you'd like to. So we decided we'd try it. And once I heard that thing crackle, and somebody said, this rock's wiggling. And one of the other divers said, what? He said, this rock's wiggling. Get out of the way. And all once that rock lifted right off the bottom and just hung there in midair.
In June 2008, Greenup County, Kentucky issued an indictment against Steve Shaffer for violating the Kentucky Antiquities Act and removing Indian Head rock from the Ohio River. The indictment against Steve Shaffer was for not seeking the proper permits in removing the rock. Kentucky laid claim to the rock as a noted archaeological recorded site. The rock was registered by the University of Kentucky as a protected archaeological object in 1986. With the rock residing in Portsmouth, Ohio, the Commonwealth of Kentucky wanted its property back. On January 8, 2008, State Representative Reginald Meeks introduced House Resolution 12 in the Kentucky General Assembly. The resolution read, condemn the removal of Indian Head rock to the city of Portsmouth, Ohio, and urge the city of Portsmouth to return the rock to its original location. On January 26, 2008, House Resolution 12 was adopted by a voice vote.
I was elected Attorney General in November of 2007 and was sworn in early January of 2008. And so it was in the early days of my administration. And I recall sitting at my desk in Frankfurt there in the Capitol and my executive assistant coming over to the speaker saying, Jack, you have a call from the Attorney General of Ohio, Mark Dan. So I wonder what he wants. So I pick up the phone and he starts talking about this rock, the rock and this and that. We got to figure out something on this rock, and I need to negotiate something on this rock. And he was kind of a fast talker to begin with, and he said, maybe we could keep it 6 months, you keep it 6 months, we have an exchange. I'm like, what on earth are you? So I got into it a little bit and realized that what had happened, that the rock had been taken from the Kentucky side of the river. Clearly, Kentucky owns to the I guess it's the low water mark in 1792 over on the north side of the Ohio River. So it was clearly in the Kentucky side, and I learned a little bit about the rock, and that it was over in, I guess, Portsmouth, Ohio, in a garage over there. And we heard from some Native American groups who wanted it preserved. We heard from professor in UK in antiquities who had concerns, and so that's how I first learned about Indian Head rock. And then shortly thereafter, the Commonwealth attorney in Greenup and Lewis counties indicted Shaffer for some sort of theft, one of the theft statutes. And so that's how I first heard of it, and that's how I first became involved.
I never heard about it until a state policeman called me on the telephone, and he said, I've got a new case for you, Cliff. He said, and he laid it out about this rock in the river that these people stole, and I won't use the language I used at the time, but I just couldn't. I thought he was kidding me, and until I got into it and understood more about it. Well, when I first heard about it, I hadn't really thought much about it, didn't have a whole lot of feelings about it until I understood Kentucky's Antiquities Act that I wasn't familiar with at the time. We hadn't had a case like that. And I don't know anybody else that personally that had. There have been some cases around Kentucky, I just hadn't been acquainted with it until I understood the importance of preserving those kinds of things that are registered in Kentucky.
Well, it gets recorded as an archaeological site in 1978, but it was known to archaeologists since the early 1800s because it's mentioned in Squire and Davis's survey of the Ohio Valley. So it's been known as an archaeological site, as an archaeological resource for almost 200 years. I don't think it's something that either state can really make a claim to as more important to. I think to Native Americans it was probably an important spot too because it's a prominent spot on the river. So it would have been a landmark for people when they traveled the river. So to say that it's more important to one than the other, I think misses the point.
Well, of course, they filed criminal charges against us. First, it was antiquities theft, and that didn't apply to any of their laws, what we did. And they finally dropped that, and they charged us with receiving stolen property, and I'm not sure where that came from, but somebody was going to pay for this thing. And so this drug on for 2.5 years.
Well, the first thing was to find out, was this a legitimate historical artifact that needed to be preserved on behalf of interested groups in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. I mean, there was some question whether it was a real rock. There was some question whether or not these were real Indian drawings on the rock. So, you know, my first thought was, let's make certain this whole thing is legit, because as Attorney General of Kentucky, you have a lot of responsibilities, and fighting over a rock was not really high on my priority list. And you know, sometimes you go looking for issues, and sometimes the issues find you. And this is a classic example of the latter.
Ohio, not to be outdone, also fired back from their legislature. In May 2008, Ohio Representative Todd Book, along with 66 co-sponsors, introduced and adopted House Resolution number 137 in the 127th Ohio General Assembly regular session, applauding Steve Shaffer and his efforts in finding and preserving history.
Book that didn't have anything else to do on a hot summer day, or some other idea. We don't really know. We also don't know for sure where, this is the Ohio River, not the Kentucky River, where this rock was located and whether it was Ohio or Kentucky territory. However, there are a lot of things we do know about the rock. Really gotten to know Steve through this process and think he's a great guy, and think in the whole grand scheme of things, he was really trying to do good, and probably got portrayed in a bad way. But yeah, he came to my office as a state representative to mention this to me. I'm not sure of the dates, but it was a few months before I got involved. And he came in and said, look, these people are wanting to, these people being Kentucky, they want to indict me. They're really upset that this rock has been taken out of the river. And in many respects, I looked at it and I said, Steve, I didn't tell him this, but it was like, Steve, it's kind of like you created this little problem. I'll help you where I can, but obviously this is something you wanted to do, so I guess kind of deal with it. A month or so later, he comes back to me and says, look, you got a connection to this rock, whether you know it or not. And I said, well, tell me about that. And he goes on to tell me about and produces a newspaper article saying that this head that was carved on the rock was actually done by a young man named Johnny Book from Portsmouth. And they talk about where he was from in the newspaper article, and that he went over and carved this with a chisel or whatever else to this face. And that kind of piqued my interest because, well, that's interesting. I honestly, unfortunately, didn't know really my family history that well, and even whether we were in the community back in the 1800s when this was allegedly happening. So it was kind of interesting for me and kind of sparked some interest to say, well, let's find out more about this. So that's really how I got involved and started to look into the situation.
Portsmouth, Ohio embraced the history of the rock and decided to get the community involved on the rock issue, having a rock festival and creating public awareness. Local historians made shirts and even a lighthearted film about the seriousness of the ownership of the rock issue.
We celebrate Kentucky, man, and we're not in another country. We got Jesse Stewart on our murals. We've got Don Gullett, the professional baseball player, comes to our banquet. And we've got him painted on our murals. We celebrate, we're one and the same. And then the next thing you know, it was us and them and you guys and you cowboys and thieves and, whoa, who are they talking about? So that's when I took my liberty and did the Indian Head Rock song, We Will Rock You, and did a video and had some fun with it. And I don't know if I helped the cause or set us back, but that's how I met Steve Shaffer. That video led to Steve Shaffer.
We will rock you. Come on. We will rock you. We don't want to hide, should display with pride for both sides in the public eye. you big disgrace. Why you wanna put the rock back in its place? We will rock you. Everybody!
Tried to make a good time out of it, and the bigger it got, you know, well, then you have festivals and you have a rock party, and people were sincerely behind, you know, having the rock out and on display and everything. So.
Yeah, well, once I bit hard, and we started doing what we could to let the people know about what was going on with the rock, and also make people have an appreciation for the history of the rock and what it meant to Portsmouth, and the fact that it had been mentioned in the Portsmouth Historic Record. So one thing we did was we tied it to the 4th of July fireworks that I was part of at the time, and we did this rock festival. And rock festival had rock wall climbing and different activities where kids could win prizes. And we had a big rock, paper, scissors battle to kind of like for prizes and things as well. But it was an opportunity for people to learn about this rock and the importance of the rock.
The best story about the Indian Head Rock is Steve Hayes, my good buddy and the program director and morning show host out of the big station in Portsmouth, and we're close. And I used to do a call-in show with him, and it was April Fool's Day. And we had planned this in a little bit in advance, and this was then right in the middle of the contention. And we said, oh my God, it was about 4 in the morning, and the police came over from Kentucky with a big flatbed and a crane grabber, and they took the rock. And the rock is now in Greenup County.
It was something they pulled from the murky waters.
It's called the Ohio River, and we're from Ohio, so it belongs to us.
But their neighbors disagreed.
Hold on there, buddy. The Ohio River and everything in it belongs to Kentucky.
So 2 states went to war over the rock.
And oh my God! And I said, can you verify this? And I said, from the best sources that I have, you know, we were tongue in cheek. It was an April Fool's joke. I got called on the carpet. My news director and my general manager brought me in and said, how dare you? This is a news story. There's court cases in this, and you're talking about getting stolen by police, and it wasn't and stuff. I said it was an April Fool's joke on a fool's radio station in the morning, and he said a half hour later, he goes, did you ever hear War of the Worlds? So, I mean, that's how passionate people were about this rock.
And, you know, I tried to have fun with the whole thing. Kentucky legislators and law over there, they were going to come over and forcibly take the rock. Well, we had our Civil War reenactment people, you know, for pictures around the rock and everything, like we're protecting the rock, you know, you're not going to come get the rock. So, I mean, and all that led to, I think, just more of a story. And
one of the things that I had talked about and floated as a way to resolve this outside of continuing litigation was, you know, this is kind of a silly problem, and sometimes silly problems deserve silly solutions. And I thought, why don't we, one of the things I proposed was, let's have a rock, paper, scissors battle. This could be something that we've got all of this national exposure now, like I said, rightly or wrongly. Let's line some people up on the Ohio side of the bridge and some Kentuckians on the Kentucky side of the bridge, and we'll just have our rock, paper, scissors battle. And whoever wins this thing, whoever wins the battle will get to keep the rock, either keep it forever or keep it for a year or two and then maybe try it again. But historically, the communities in southern Ohio and northern Kentucky, that part of the state, we have things to do with each other, but not that much, really. I mean, you would think there would be more of a cohesion there. No, I shouldn't. People marry each other across the river and all that, and there's all kinds of Kentucky jokes on the Ohio side, and I'm sure there's all kinds of Ohio jokes on the Kentucky side. But we really don't have that much stuff going on together openly. And I would think that may be a way for us to show solidarity and community and find a good solution to this that would involve something that may actually create some interest outside of the community, get people to come and visit and look at this beautiful rock that is so important to the history.
Because Mr. Duvall had indicted Mr. Shaffer, the Attorney General of Ohio wanted to work out something amicably. We were threatening a lawsuit. We were threatening to sue Ohio. You know, the mayor of Portsmouth was saying things like, never will this be returned. I know the Speaker of the Ohio House of Representatives threatened to go down there personally with his own gun and guard the rock. There were things like that that were going on. And we were considering, okay, do we sue Ohio? And I remember having a discussion with my staff. I said, okay, if we sue Ohio, the Constitution is very clear that the only original action you can have in the Supreme Court of the United States is when one state sues another. So it wasn't like, okay, do we sue them in federal district court in Kentucky? No, we were thinking maybe we had to sue them in the Supreme Court of the United States. And at that time, that's when CNN and CBS and everyone got very interested in the story.
The legal battle lasted until 2010, when all charges were dropped against Steve Shaffer. The rock was to be returned to Kentucky, and local Kentucky officials were to make a decision on whether to return the rock to the river, display it, or move it to a museum.
About the time the criminal trial wrapped up, they charged us with a civil offense. Myself, Dave Vetter, my die buddy, the city of Portsmouth. This is a whole different ball of wax. This is in federal court in Ashland. And I think they wanted $90,000. They wanted us to pay for the transportation of the rock, and they wanted the rock. And we got over into this courtroom, and this was a federal judge, and he was appointed. He's not elected, and he's the boss. He is the boss. So he looks down at all these attorneys for Kentucky and our attorneys, and he says, "Gentlemen, I don't want this rock in my courtroom. There's a room over there. Figure out how to get it out." So we went in this room, and it didn't take long at all. The Portsmouth solicitor told me, "Steve, you spent a lot of money on this rock. We spent a lot of money on this rock. Let's just give it to them and make them take care of it." And I said, "Fine, that's all we wanted in the first place, was a guarantee that it wasn't going to go back in the river."
What it boils down to is that I foresaw that because of the lack of ability to actually pin this down as a registered site, I felt that there would be jurors who would say, this is not Indian Head rock beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, this is probably Indian Head rock, but it might not be, based upon these other historical accounts. And I knew I had been up against these defense lawyers who were representing Stephen Shaffer many times, and I knew they were bright fellows, and I knew they'd be onto that. And so that was, of course, one of the reasons. Other reasons were, as you say, many people didn't see the significance of the case to begin with. Other people were on fire about it. You never know who's going to come in on a jury. In a fair sampling of the community, you're going to get people that are saying, "Hey, Mr. Duval, you're wasting money on this case." And other ones are going to say, "No, by golly, we got to protect this." But all it takes is one to mess a case up. We're in a criminal case, and they have to have a unanimous verdict. So there were a lot of reasons, and those were among the chief ones that I felt that a conviction against Stephen Shaffer and his men was in question.
Slowly after the trial ended, the local news media stopped covering any rock-related topics. The rock was loaded onto a truck and driven over to Greenup, Kentucky. The rock was placed into a municipal county garage, covered by a tarp, and waited its next journey. Local residents of both Portsmouth and Kentucky thought the rock would be displayed for the public to see. This, as of 2017, has never happened. What will the future of Indian Head rock be? Where could the rock be moved today to be appreciated by historians, archaeologists, and showcase the local history of the region?
Well, I liken where the rock rests now as to being back in the water. I mean, it's in oblivion. It's not on display. It's not protected. It's just in a shed.
Might want it up at a local state park called Greenbow. And I said, well, that's going to be a bigger decision than I can possibly give you. But at one time, that's where, the conversation was headed. And I'll tell you this right now, wherever it goes or wherever it lands, I hope it's someplace different than where it is right now. and stored away with a blue tarp over it in a county garage is just simply not my idea of anything.
And then there was a group of folks, I do recall this, there were a group of folks who wanted a ceremony to plunk it back down in the river from the spot where they believe it came. And my thought was, if I get this daggone rock back, you're not, one thing, if I manage to get this rock back, okay, we're not going to let them plunk it back in the Ohio River. We're going to put it, if UK is going to put this much pressure on me, if UK is going to encourage federal lawsuits and talk to the U.S. Attorney's Office and to the Attorney General's office, then we're going to put it in a place where it can be properly preserved.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. See, the thing is, what's the end result has been, the rock is removed from its context. So you've destroyed the site, you removed the rock from its context, and it's just as hidden today as it was if it was in the river. So it would have been, in a lot of ways, just better off left in the river. As I said before, put up didactic rails, just interpret it, have pictures, store pictures, and you could have done a lot with it. And if what you're interested in tourism, that would have been as good for your tourism as putting it in a building.
Talked about building a little annex onto the Welcome Center where we're filming this, and it could have been a glass enclosure so when people were visiting the murals they could walk over and see the Indian Head Rock through the glass. It wouldn't even have to be open for them to come in to see it. There was all kinds of options.
Stick it back here in the water, or give it a place that the individuals can come and see what all of the hullabaloo was about. Anyway, and just like I said, I think, of course, I'm not an archaeologist or something, but I'm just thinking that if something's been actually underwater for all of that time, you put it out and then has different atmospheric pressures and things like that, it'll probably start deteriorating. I would think. It'll be here long after I'm gone for sure, but it's just sad that it's in a bin. I mean, let's put it on display or something, if nothing else.
It is just a rock. But it's a rock that tells a story, and it's a rock that tells a story about a community and folks that live there, and folks that thought it was important enough for them to row out out into the river to carve their initials or their images or whatever on this rock. So it's important that way. It's also important for, I think, the community because it has a way, or has the ability to bring us together and not divide us. And I think really the community's probably moved on in many respects. This is not something that they even talk about or are concerned with. But you still have this piece of history that was lost. Now it's found. If there's a way to share that, we should do that. My good friend Mark Twain said it's better to steal something than to let it lie around neglected. And we have this rock that's lying around neglected. Let's find a way to use it for a benefit.
The rock seems to appear and disappears for 100 years, and it shows its face again, and now it's disappeared again, and I'm not sure the last chapter's been written. I wouldn't be surprised if calmer heads, prevail, and there could be something done.
And that was always the trick in this case, Steve, was that, yes, you could be amused by it, you could be kind of like, wow, I can't believe this is what I'm dealing with today. But you can't just gloss over that someone came into the Commonwealth of Kentucky within our borders, took something that didn't belong to them. There are laws to protect against that. And while you can be amused at the whole situation, you can't be cavalier about enforcing the law. And that, for me, was always kind of something I had to remind myself of.
I think the other thought is Steve Shaffer should be celebrated for bringing back to life some of the history that had been completely lost, completely forgotten, and instead he was turned into the bad guy and was trying to be portrayed as someone that was trying to do bad things. And really all he was wanting to try to do, I think, was fulfill a commitment he made to himself as a kid to find this rock. And then once he found it, he was so excited about it, he wanted to let everybody else know that it was out there. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think the fact that he was trying to bring history back to life for the community is a good thing, and he should be celebrated and not looked at as a pariah.
Having spent the summer on the Ohio River gave me an appreciation of the many things that constitute life between Kentucky and Ohio. From the history of the region forgotten by most, to the peace and tranquility of the beauty of the river and the rolling hills. Studying the history of Indian Head Rock led me to reading and thinking of the historical accounts of the Ohio Valley region of both Kentucky and Ohio. From the War of 1812, led by Tecumseh, to the Great Flood of 1937, to the present-day Indian Head Rock controversy, this region has witnessed the turbulent historical ebb and flow of social, economic, and cultural change. Some say Indian Head Rock is just a simple, non-significant rock. Critics ask, what is the big deal about a simple rock? Why are we wasting so much time and energy fighting over who owns a sandstone boulder? If researching Indian Head Rock has taught me anything, it has taught me that the Indian Head Rock is more than just a simple rock. It has taught me that this boulder that was immersed in the Ohio River for almost a century represents the life of folks who are separated and united by time and geography. The rock represents history, adventure, culture, and a bygone era where symbols were as important as our family name. The story of Indian Head Rock is, as the saying goes, stranger than fiction. The rock throughout its history has been a historical and cultural marker for travelers, historians, archaeologists, politicians, and filmmakers. The future of Indian Head Rock is unknown. Local politicians and city officials are still holding discussion at the completion of this film. The debate where the rock should be placed continues, and folks on both sides of the river await a decision. A decision that is bound to stir even more controversy. To some, the rock is a simplistic boulder that was blown out of proportion. To others, the rock represented state pride, history, and a reminder of our past. Like the last herd of buffalo on the American plains, the rock represents everything we are, where we came from, and where we are going. So what does the future hold for Indian Head Rock? Will the rock reemerge once again for a future generation to enjoy it? Who knows what the future holds? Only time will tell. Indian Head Rock will always be remembered as a polarizing symbol, with people on both sides of the river grimacing and discussing its significance to their lives and heritage. The rock throughout its history has always found ways to reemerge as new generations and curious individuals ponder its significance. Presently, the rock is still behind closed doors and cannot be seen by the citizens from either side of the river who are curious about its origin, its history, and its future. I am almost certain that behind its secluded environment, the rock continues to smile after all these years.
Give us a good closing comment, Jack, on the rock. One last one off the question sheet there.
Hey, Ohio, don't mess with Kentucky.